The late afternoon sun hung low over the small town of Lincoln, Nebraska. The air was warm, quiet, peaceful, until the sound of laughter cut through it. 5 bikers leaned against their motorcycles in front of Jerry's roadside diner, talking loud, showing off, filling the calm with their noise. Across the parking lot, a man in his mid-40s moved slowly toward them. He was in a sleek black wheelchair, dressed neatly in a button-down shirt and faded jeans. His name was Leon. He'd just finished some errands and stopped for a late lunch, unaware that this simple stop was about to test his patience and his strength. As Leon rolled toward the diner door, the laughter from the group grew louder. One of the bikers elbowed the other, smirking as he pointed. "Hey, look at that. Rollin' Thunder's coming through." The others burst into cruel laughter, their voices echoing off the parked cars. Leon didn't flinch. He didn't even look their way. He just kept rolling, calm and steady, his focus on the diner door. You could see the quiet confidence in him, the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself, but the bikers weren't done. The leader of the group, a big man with a leather vest and a patch that read Outlaw Rebels, pushed himself off his bike. He started walking toward Leon, his boots crunching on the gravel. The other 4 followed, laughing as they came closer. The sound of their heavy steps filled the air, replacing the soft hum of the highway nearby. Leon slowed down. He could feel them closing in behind him. He stopped near the diner entrance, one hand resting lightly on the wheel, his eyes calm but alert. The leader stopped just a few feet away. His grin was sharp, his tone mocking. "Where you headed in such a hurry, buddy?" His friend snickered behind him. Leon turned his head slightly, his voice even and steady. "Just grabbing some lunch," that's all he said. No anger, no fear, just calm words that somehow made the biker's grin fade for a moment. The man stepped closer, trying to regain his power. "No need to rush, we're just saying hi," he said, his sarcasm dripping like oil. The younger biker beside him, skinny with tattooed arms, laughed and made a rolling motion with his hands. "Hey, careful man, don't run us over." More laughter followed. It wasn't funny, just loud, empty noise meant to push buttons. Leon's fingers tightened slightly on his wheel, but his face didn't change. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before. Mockery, stares, the kind of cruel amusement that comes from people who think strength only comes from muscle. He looked up at the leader, eyes steady. "I don't want any trouble," he said quietly. "Just lunch." For a second, no one said anything. Then the laughter started again, but this time it sounded forced, uneasy. The man in the wheelchair wasn't reacting the way they expected. There was something about his calmness that made them uncomfortable. Inside the diner, a few people had noticed. Faces turned toward the window, watching silently. No one moved, though. No one wanted to get involved. Leon's hand hovered near his pocket as the bikers shifted around him, forming a loose circle. The tension in the air was sharp now, like the quiet before a storm. He knew this wasn't going to end with just words. The leader leaned closer, the smell of gasoline and leather heavy in the air. "We're just having a little fun," he said, but his smile was gone. Leon stayed silent, his eyes locked on the man's. It wasn't a stare of challenge, it was something stronger. It was control, patience, dignity, the kind of look that says, "You don't scare me." The laughter behind the leader softened, turning into uneasy shuffling. Leon glanced once toward the open road, the afternoon light catching the edge of his wheelchair's frame. He took a slow breath. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was simply ready for whatever was about to come next. His stillness spoke louder than any words could. The bikers didn't realize it yet, but they had already lost their power the moment they tried to take away his peace. The diner door creaked open slightly from the breeze, and for a moment the clinking of dishes and faint sound of music drifted out. Life inside continued as normal. But outside, in that small-town parking lot, a quiet storm was brewing, one that would soon turn the bully's laughter into silence. Leon adjusted his position, lifted his chin, and looked straight ahead. The leader smirked, trying to hide his unease. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he asked. Leon didn't answer. His silence was more powerful than any comeback. And in that silence, something shifted. A strange feeling passed through the group, like they'd picked a fight they didn't understand. The leader chuckled again, but this time his voice sounded thinner, less sure. "You're awfully calm for a guy surrounded by 5 bikes." Leon met his gaze and simply said, "Calm doesn't mean weak." That line landed heavier than any insult could. Even the biker's smirk faltered. For the first time, they looked at Leon and saw not just a man in a chair, but someone who carried a quiet kind of power. The air between them grew still, thick with tension. And though no one could have guessed it yet, that small moment of quiet between mockery and respect was the beginning of something none of them would ever forget. Leon's words hung in the air like a quiet challenge. Calm doesn't mean weak. For a moment, everything froze. The laughter died down, replaced by an uneasy silence that made even the breeze sound louder. The leader's smirk twitched as if he didn't quite know how to respond. He'd expected fear, not composure. Mockery usually brought reactions, anger, shame, or retreat. But this man in front of him, he didn't give them any of that. The leader took a slow step closer, boots crunching against the gravel. "You've got a smart mouth for a guy sitting down," he said, his tone half joking, half threatening. The others snickered again, but the sound wasn't as strong this time. It was nervous, forced. One of them muttered, "He probably thinks he's tough just 'cause he's calm." Another elbowed him. "Nah, he's just scared stiff, can't even move fast." They laughed again, trying to recover their confidence. Leon didn't reply. He just looked at them, steady and unflinching. His stillness seemed to make them even more restless. There was something unsettling about a man who refused to play their game. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't fighting. He was simply sitting, in his own quiet strength. Inside the diner, a waitress had stopped wiping the counter. Her brow furrowed as she peeked out the window. A couple at a corner booth looked over their shoulders, exchanging worried glances. Nobody wanted to step in, but everyone could feel it. The shift in energy. Something wasn't right. The leader tilted his head, pretending to relax. "Look, we're just messing around. You don't gotta take everything so serious." Leon's voice was calm, deep, and certain. "I'm not taking it serious. You are." That line caught them off guard. It wasn't said in anger, just truth. The man beside the leader chuckled awkwardly. "You got jokes, huh?" He stepped forward, tapping the side of Leon's wheelchair with his boot. "Nice ride you got there. How fast does it go?" Leon didn't even glance at the boot. "Faster than you think," he said simply, his voice steady as ever. That earned a low whistle from one of the bikers. "Oh, he's got some attitude," the younger one said, his tattooed arms flexing as he folded them. "Maybe he wants to prove how fast it goes." Leon's eyes shifted from one face to the next, reading them, almost like a teacher watching children who didn't know they were being foolish. His silence unnerved them more than shouting ever could. The leader sighed, rolling his shoulders as if bored. "Man, relax, nobody's trying to hurt you," he said. "We're just having a little fun. You know how it is." Leon's response was quiet, deliberate. "No, I don't think I do." The man frowned, confused for a second. Leon went on. "Fun isn't when someone's the punchline." For the first time, there was no laughter. Even the youngest biker, the one who had been the loudest, looked down briefly. But pride is a stubborn thing. The leader quickly put his grin back on, forcing another laugh. "Oh, come on, lighten up. We're not the bad guys here." Leon tilted his head slightly. "Then maybe stop acting like them." That hit harder than any shout could. The man's grin faltered. His buddies glanced at each other again, unsure how far they wanted to take this. But the leader couldn't back down now, not in front of his crew. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping lower. "You think just 'cause you sit there and talk all calm that we won't push back?" Leon didn't move, didn't blink. "You can push," he said softly, "but it won't get you far." It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact, said with such quiet certainty that it felt heavier than anger. The space between them grew tighter. The air felt heavy. Even the distant sound of highway traffic seemed to fade away. Leon's wheelchair gleamed faintly under the sunlight as he adjusted it slightly, ready to roll forward toward the diner. But as he moved, the leader shifted, stepping directly into his path again. "I said, we're just talking," he muttered, though the edge in his voice betrayed his irritation. Leon looked up at him, his expression unchanged. "Then maybe say something worth listening to." That one line was like a spark dropped in gasoline. The group froze, unsure whether to laugh or take offense. The leader's jaw tightened. He bent forward, close enough that Leon could smell the faint mix of cigarette smoke and gasoline on his jacket. "You think you're better than us, huh?" Leon's reply was calm but sharp. No, just different. The leader straightened up, taken aback by how quick the response came and how true it sounded. There was no bravado in Leon's tone, no ego, just quiet strength. One of the bikers finally muttered, "Man, this ain't even fun anymore." The others didn't answer. Their earlier excitement was draining away, replaced by confusion and something close to discomfort. The power dynamic was shifting and they could all feel it. Leon glanced at the diner door. The waitress was still watching from inside, phone in hand, probably ready to call someone if things went bad. He gave her a small nod, almost reassuring her. Then he turned back to the group. "You done?" No one answered. For a few seconds, the only sound was the wind brushing against the flags hanging near the diner sign. Then, trying to recover, the youngest one laughed nervously. "Man, you're lucky we're in a good mood today." Leon looked at him, almost kindly. "No, I'm just lucky I don't live my life trying to prove something to strangers." That one line hit like quiet thunder. Even the leader's eyes dropped for a brief second before he forced another fake laugh. But the laughter didn't carry the same power anymore. It sounded hollow, echoing off the empty parking lot like a joke that had lost its punchline. Leon didn't say another word. He simply placed his hands back on the wheels, ready to move forward again. His calm was unshaken, his dignity untouched. The men who thought they could make him feel small had ended up shrinking in their own reflection. The leader opened his mouth as if to say something else. But before he could, Leon's hand slipped into his pocket. The motion was slow, deliberate, and it made every biker freeze. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. The leader frowned, suddenly unsure. "What are you doing?" he asked. Leon didn't answer. He looked at his phone, then at the man in front of him. "Just making a call," he said quietly. "You'll want to stay and see what happens next." His voice was calm, steady, almost too calm, and that calmness unsettled them more than anything else. The laughter was gone now. The air had changed. The game they started was no longer fun, and deep down they could all feel it. Something was coming. The parking lot had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, the kind that presses against your chest. Even the breeze seemed to pause. The bikers, once loud and confident, now stood still, watching Leon as he calmly held his phone. His expression didn't change. His eyes didn't flinch. He just scrolled briefly, then tapped one name. The leader shifted his weight uneasily. "Who you calling, huh?" "The cops?" he said, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked slightly at the end. The others chuckled, but it wasn't the same kind of laugh as before, and it was thin, uncertain. Leon didn't reply. He lifted the phone to his ear, eyes steady, face calm. His silence was louder than any threat could have been. He waited, then spoke a few quiet words, too soft for anyone to hear. His tone was polite, measured, but there was something in it that made the bikers exchange nervous glances. He hung up slowly, slid the phone back into his pocket, and looked at the leader. He didn't say a word. That silence made the man's stomach twist. "What was that?" the leader demanded, trying to mask his unease with a smirk. "You think we're scared of a phone call?" Leon said nothing. He simply turned his chair slightly, facing the diner wall, the sun reflecting faintly off his wheels. He looked completely at ease, almost like he was waiting for something. The tattooed biker tried to break the tension. "Yo, maybe he ordered a pizza," he joked, forcing a laugh. "Hope he got enough for all of us." No one laughed with him. The air felt heavier now. Even the sound of cars passing on the highway seemed distant, muted. The leader ran a hand through his hair, pretending to stretch, pretending not to care. But his eyes kept flicking toward the road. "You think you're scaring us, man?" he said, his tone uneven. "We don't get scared that easy." Leon finally looked up, meeting his eyes. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You should have thought of that before." The leader froze for half a second, not sure what that meant. "Before what?" he asked. Leon didn't answer. He turned his gaze toward the open road, the faintest hint of a smile crossing his face. Not mocking, not smug, just a knowing calm. The men started shifting, suddenly restless. The youngest one muttered, "Man, I don't like this. Let's just go." "Shut up," the leader snapped, though his voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. He was watching Leon now, not out of anger but out of confusion. There was something about the man's calm that felt wrong, like he knew something they didn't. A couple of customers from inside the diner stepped out cautiously, pretending to be on their phones, but everyone was watching the same thing. Leon sat still near the entrance, his hands folded loosely on his lap, eyes never leaving the distance. The seconds dragged. The leader kicked a rock across the gravel just to fill the silence. "Man, you're wasting our time," he said, forcing a laugh. "You really think someone's coming?" Leon looked back at him slowly, the sunlight catching in his eyes. "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." That line hit harder than expected. The leader's grin twitched again, but his confidence was cracking. His voice came out harsher than he meant it to. "You're bluffing." "Nobody's coming." Leon gave a small shrug. "Maybe." Then he turned his gaze away again toward the open road that stretched far and empty in the warm light. The calmness in his tone made their nerves crawl. A long minute passed. Then two. The laughter had completely died. Even the engines of their bikes, once symbols of power, now looked like oversized props sitting uselessly in the heat. The tattooed biker whispered, "You think he called like the cops? Or someone else?" The leader scoffed, "Don't be stupid. Who's he gonna call?" But even he didn't sound sure. Leon sat motionless, like time itself had slowed down around him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't tense. He was waiting, patient as the sky. Then faintly, somewhere far off, there came a low rumble. It was soft at first, like thunder in the distance. One of the bikers turned his head. "You hear that?" "Probably a truck," another said, but his voice lacked conviction. The sound grew louder, steady, rhythmic, familiar. Engines. But not just one, many. The leader's smirk faltered. He turned toward the sound, shading his eyes from the sun. Down the long stretch of highway, faint glimmers of chrome and black leather began to appear. One, then another, then a line of them. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. The others turned too, their eyes widening. The sound was unmistakable now. The deep, unified roar of powerful motorcycles approaching together, the kind that makes the ground tremble. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Leon didn't move. He just sat there, the breeze brushing against his shirt, his face calm as ever. The corner of his mouth curved upward, not a full smile, just a quiet, knowing expression. The leader turned back to him, his voice suddenly strained. "You called them?" Leon didn't answer. His silence was the answer. The men looked at one another. Their tough expressions had started to fade, replaced by uncertainty, and something that looked a lot like fear. The engines grew louder, closer, surrounding them with sound. Dust lifted from the road as the convoy neared the diner parking lot. The leader took a half step back without realizing it. "No way," he whispered. "No way this is for real." Leon finally spoke, his voice steady as ever. "You wanted attention," he said softly. "Now you've got it." The bikers didn't know what to say. For the first time since the mocking began, the power in the air had shifted completely. The bullies weren't laughing anymore. The man they tried to humiliate wasn't just some stranger in a chair. He was someone who had friends. The kind of friends who didn't take disrespect lightly. As the roar of engines filled the lot, drowning out every other sound, Leon leaned back slightly and exhaled, calm, unbothered, unafraid. He had made one quiet phone call and everything was about to change. The sound grew louder with every passing second, rolling over the flat Nebraska road like a wave of thunder. The once quiet parking lot of Jerry's Diner now seemed to vibrate under the rising hum. Dust began to lift in small clouds as the engines approached. The air smelled faintly of oil, rubber, and something else. Expectation. The bikers, the same ones who had been laughing moments ago, stood frozen. Their smirks were gone, replaced by the kind of tight expressions people wear when they're trying to look unbothered but failing. The leader squinted toward the road, hand raised to block the glare of the setting sun. "Who the hell are these guys?" he muttered, though no one answered. Leon stayed exactly where he was, just outside the diner door, his wheelchair angled slightly toward the road. His face was calm, almost unreadable. He wasn't smirking, wasn't boasting. He just watched. It was as if he'd known this moment was coming all along. The rumble became a roar, loud enough to shake the windows of the diner. Inside, a few people stood now, pressing their hands against the glass. A little boy climbed up on a booth to see better, his mother tugging him down. The waitress whispered something to the cook, who stopped what he was doing and turned to look. Everyone could feel that something big was about to happen. Out on the road, the first bikes appeared, dark shapes in the sunlight, moving fast and in perfect formation. One row after another, they rolled forward like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Their jackets caught the light, black leather with silver patches that gleamed briefly before the dust swallowed them again. The sound hit full force as the convoy turned into the lot. The ground seemed to pulse under the weight of dozens of engines moving in sync. Each rider handled their bike with steady precision. No one spoke. No one shouted. It was organized, deliberate, like soldiers who didn't need to prove anything. The leader of the mocking bikers swallowed hard, glancing at his crew. "It's just a coincidence," he said quickly, trying to convince himself more than them. But no one looked convinced. One of the younger bikers whispered, "Man, that's too many to be a coincidence." Leon finally moved, just a small shift in his chair, nothing dramatic. But it was enough to draw their eyes back to him. He didn't look afraid. He didn't even seem tense. He looked steady. The wind ruffled his shirt and a faint half-smile touched his face, more peace than pride. The convoy kept rolling in, the sound of tires crunching on gravel filling the air. The leader's eyes darted from Leon to the incoming riders, then back again. His confidence was fading fast. The first group of bikes came to a stop a few yards away, lined up in perfect symmetry. Behind them, more followed, filling the lot like a tide of chrome and steel. Engines idled low, growling softly, a sound that somehow made the silence in between even heavier. The man at the front removed his helmet slowly. He was older, tall, with a thick silver beard and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much of the world to be impressed by bullies. His jacket bore a patch that read "Guardians of the Road." He turned his gaze toward Leon and something passed between them, something silent but strong. Leon gave a small nod, calm and respectful. The older man nodded back once before shutting off his engine. The others followed one by one. The roar died slowly, replaced by the steady clicking of cooling metal and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy, expectant kind that makes your pulse quicken even if you're not part of the story. The kind that comes right before something changes. The leader of the bullies shifted uncomfortably. His earlier bravado was gone. He ran his hand over his vest, eyes darting between the newcomers and his own crew. "You know these guys?" he asked Leon, though his voice cracked halfway through. Leon finally turned to him. His tone was soft but carried weight. "Let's just say," he began, pausing as if to let the words settle, "they don't like seeing disrespect." The leader scoffed weakly. "Disrespect? We were just kidding around." But the words came out thin, hollow. Even he didn't believe them anymore. The older man with the silver beard dismounted his bike and began walking toward them. Each step was slow, controlled. His boots hit the gravel with the weight of someone who didn't need to announce his authority. It was already there. The other riders didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Their presence alone filled the space with quiet power. Inside the diner, a man whispered, "That's the Guardians. They look out for people on the road." The waitress nodded, her eyes wide. Guess somebody called for backup. Outside, the leader of the bullies backed up slightly, his smirk long gone. "This some kind of joke?" he asked, trying to sound amused but failing. Leon finally spoke again, his voice low but firm. "No. This is what happens when you think people like me are alone." The line hung in the air, sinking deep. The silver-bearded man stopped beside Leon, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. "You good, brother?" he asked, his tone calm and even. Leon nodded once. "I am now." The older man turned toward the group of bullies, his expression unreadable. "Then let's take care of this." The rest of the Guardians began to fan out, their boots crunching softly against the gravel. No shouting, no threats, just silent presence, enough to make the air itself feel heavier. The bullies had no idea what to do. Their laughter, their mockery, their swagger, gone. All that was left was nervous shifting and the quiet sound of engines cooling under the setting sun. The leader tried one last time to keep control. "We didn't mean nothing by it," he said quickly, his voice forced. "Just messing around." The older man tilted his head slightly. "Messing around?" he repeated slowly. "That what you call it?" The leader opened his mouth to answer but closed it again. There was nothing to say. The wind blew across the lot, lifting dust into the orange light. The sky was beginning to darken. What had started as a lazy afternoon at a diner had turned into a lesson neither side would forget. And as Leon looked at the circle of men who once mocked him, now standing silent and unsure, he realized something powerful. Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice or fight back. Sometimes all it takes is quiet strength and the right people standing beside you. The engines rumbled softly again, not in threat, but in unity, a sound that carried respect, protection, and peace. And though the storm hadn't yet fully broken, everyone in that parking lot could feel it coming. The leader of the Guardians, the man with the silver beard, stood tall under the fading orange light. His presence was calm but heavy, the kind that didn't need words to demand respect. Every biker who had mocked Leon a few minutes ago could feel that weight pressing on them. The sound of gravel crunching under the Guardian's boots echoed through the parking lot, steady and deliberate, like a slow drum beat before judgment. The leader stopped just a few steps away from Leon and his harassers. He glanced at the 5 men, his eyes sharp but unreadable. "Something happened here?" he asked in a low, even tone. He wasn't shouting, he didn't need to. His voice carried more power and calm than theirs ever had in noise. The bully leader cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Nah, man, just a misunderstanding." "No big deal." The older man's gaze didn't move. "A misunderstanding?" He tilted his head slightly, then looked at Leon. "That true, brother?" Leon's reply was simple. "Not really. They thought making fun of a stranger was funny." The older man gave a slow nod, his jaw tightening. He turned back toward the bullies, folding his arms. "You think that's funny?" No one answered. The youngest of the bullies shifted from foot to foot, his eyes glued to the ground. Another tried to speak. "We didn't mean nothing by it." But his voice faded as the Guardian leader stepped closer. He stopped just a few inches away from the group's leader. "You ever think about what you sound like when you say stuff like that?" he asked. "When you laugh at someone who's just minding their business? When you turn cruelty into a joke?" The man didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was dry, his usual swagger gone. The older Guardian's voice didn't rise, but it carried the kind of weight that forced everyone to listen. "Respect," he said quietly, almost like he was explaining something simple to a child. "That's what this world's short on. You think being loud makes you strong? It doesn't. Strength is when you protect, not when you humiliate." A murmur went through the other Guardians standing behind him. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence spoke volumes. Their presence alone was enough to strip away the false confidence of the bullies. The leader of the bullies tried to recover some of his pride. He lifted his chin slightly, though his voice trembled. "We said we were sorry." The older man's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, you said you didn't mean it. That's not the same thing." He took another step forward, his shadow falling across the man's boots. "You see, I've been riding these roads a long time. I've seen men try to act tough, but let me tell you something. There's nothing tougher than a person who treats others with kindness." He turned his gaze toward Leon for a moment, then back at the group. "That man right there? He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He stayed calm when you were trying to tear him down. That's real strength." One of the Guardians behind him spoke up softly, his voice deep and steady. "Real men lift people up. They don't kick them while they're down." The leader nodded. "Exactly. The bullies looked small now, not because they were outnumbered, but because their pride had nothing to stand on. Their earlier smirks were gone, replaced with guilt and discomfort. You could see it in their eyes, that sinking realization that they'd crossed a line they didn't even understand." Leon sat quietly, watching. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't angry. He just looked peaceful, maybe relieved. This wasn't about revenge. It was about something deeper, dignity. The silver-bearded man turned back to him and asked softly, "You good, brother?" Leon nodded. "Yeah, I'm good now." The Guardian leader looked back at the bullies. "Good, then here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna apologize to this man properly this time. You're gonna mean it. And then you're gonna leave. Understand?" The group leader hesitated, jaw tight. For a second it looked like he might refuse. But then he caught sight of the line of Guardians behind the silver-bearded man. A wall of silent strength, dozens of eyes fixed on him, waiting. His defiance collapsed. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "We're sorry," he said, looking at Leon. The older guardian shook his head slowly. "Louder. Say it like you mean it." The man swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and said it again. This time louder, clearer, his voice carrying the tremor of truth. "We're sorry." The others followed, muttering their apologies one by one. The sound was awkward, clumsy, but it was real. Leon nodded once. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "Just remember, respect costs nothing." The silver-bearded guardian gave a small, approving smile. "Well said." The leader of the bullies looked at his crew, motioning for them to get on their bikes. No one said a word as they started their engines. The roar of their motorcycles, which once sounded powerful, now seemed hollow, like noise with no meaning. As they rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind them, the air finally began to feel lighter. The tension that had weighed down the parking lot lifted slowly, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. The guardians didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just stood there, letting the silence settle. Then, one by one, they began to mount their bikes again. The silver-bearded man looked back at Leon and gave him a nod. "You did good, brother. Don't let people like that shake your peace." Leon smiled softly. "I learned a long time ago, people can't take what you don't give them." The man chuckled lightly. "You've got that right." He reached out, clasping Leon's hand firmly before turning back toward his bike. "We'll be seeing you out here again." "I'll be around," Leon said. The engines started one by one, the sound deep and steady, like thunder rolling away. But this time it wasn't a sound of fear. It was a sound of unity, of brotherhood, of quiet power moving forward. As they began to pull out, a few of the diner's customers stepped outside, clapping softly, nodding at Leon. The waitress gave him a small smile, eyes bright with relief. For a moment, everyone shared that same unspoken understanding. They had just witnessed something rare. Respect earned not by force, but by quiet courage. Leon sat still, watching the last of the guardians ride off down the highway, the setting sun painting the road in gold. He felt something warm rise in his chest, not pride but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you stood your ground without hate and the world saw it. The dust settled. The sound faded. The storm had passed, but its message would linger in that small town long after the engines were gone. The last of the guardians rolled out of the parking lot, their engines fading into the open Nebraska highway. The rumble slowly dissolved into the distance until all that was left was the soft whisper of the wind. The diner's sign creaked faintly above, the sound of normal life slowly creeping back into the quiet. Leon sat there for a moment, his hands resting on his lap, eyes fixed on the road where his friends had disappeared. The sunlight caught on his chair's metal rims, turning them gold. It was over. Just like that. But what lingered wasn't relief, it was something deeper. A reminder of how ugly the world could get, and how beautiful it could become again in a single moment of unity. Inside the diner, the waitress still stood by the window, one hand pressed against the glass. When she saw Leon looking in, she gave a little nod, not out of pity but out of respect. The kind that comes from watching someone stand tall without ever needing to stand up. Leon finally wheeled himself forward, the gravel crunching softly under the tires. The air smelled of coffee, dust, and gasoline, all the leftovers of a moment that had just changed more than anyone realized. He stopped by the diner door and looked back once more. The parking lot that had been a battlefield of mockery and pride now sat still, quiet, peaceful again. For the first time in a long while, Leon smiled. Not a wide grin, just a small, honest one. He whispered under his breath, "It's never about fighting back. It's about knowing who you are." When he rolled inside, the door chimed softly. A few people at the tables turned, some smiled shyly, others just nodded. They all knew what had just happened. They had watched it unfold from behind glass, the laughter, the tension, the roar of justice arriving in leather and chrome. The waitress met him halfway with a gentle voice. "Everything okay now?" Leon smiled. "Yeah," he said. "Everything's fine." She hesitated, then added, "That was something out there." He nodded once. "It was. But sometimes people just need a reminder." She smiled faintly and led him to his usual booth by the window. "Coffee?" "Please," he said. Black, And maybe a slice of that pie, too. As she walked away, Leon looked out through the window. The light was fading fast, painting the horizon with soft streaks of orange and pink. The reflection of his face in the glass looked calm, peaceful but older somehow. Not from age, but from experience. He thought about the bikers, the way their laughter had filled the air, the way their faces had changed when they realized the balance had shifted. He didn't hate them. Not even a little. He pitied them. Because he knew what it was like to be lost, to mistake cruelty for power, mockery for confidence. But he also knew how life had a way of teaching lessons you didn't ask for. The waitress brought over his coffee, setting it down gently. The cup's warmth spread through his hands as he held it. He took a slow sip, feeling the bitterness blend with the quiet comfort of victory. Not the kind where you win a fight, but the kind where you win back your peace. He thought about his call earlier. It hadn't been dramatic. He hadn't begged for help. He'd just made one quiet call to a brother, someone who understood what standing together meant. That was the beauty of it. The Guardians didn't come for revenge. They came for respect. They came because no one rides alone, not on the road, not in life. Leon smiled again, softer this time. He wasn't proud that the bullies had been humiliated. He was proud that no one had raised a hand or shouted in anger. Everything had been done with dignity, calm, and truth. And that's what real strength looks like. Steady, kind, unbreakable. He remembered his father's words from years ago, words that had carried him through dark times. People can take your legs, your money, your pride, but they can never take your character. That's the one thing you always keep standing. Outside, a few people were still talking quietly near their cars. One of them, an older truck driver, nodded toward Leon through the window and tipped his cap. Leon smiled back. For a brief second, they both understood, not through words, but through shared humanity. As he finished his pie, the waitress returned. "You know," she said softly, "those guys might think twice before picking on someone again." Leon looked up at her. "Maybe," he said, "and maybe they'll remember what it felt like to be on the other side." She smiled, thoughtful. "World could use more folks like you." Leon chuckled lightly. "World doesn't need more of me, just more people willing to listen before they judge." She nodded slowly. "You're right about that." He left a few bills on the counter, then wheeled himself toward the door. The bell above it jingled as he rolled back out into the cooling evening. The sky was turning deeper shades of red now, the kind of color that made everything feel still. He paused by his van, his hand resting on the door handle. Behind him, Jerry's diner glowed softly, the sound of laughter and dishes returning to normal life. It was peaceful again, just the way it should be. Leon looked up at the sky, the last bit of sunlight brushing across his face. He took a long breath, slow and steady, and said quietly, "You're never really alone. You just have to know where to look." The wind caught his words and carried them across the empty lot, fading into the distance and gentle, strong, and full of truth. As he drove away, the glow of the diner lights grew smaller in his rearview mirror, but the peace stayed with him, the kind that comes when you stand your ground with grace, when you face hate with calm, and when you realize that real power isn't in your hands. It's in your heart. The highway stretched out in front of Leon like an endless ribbon of fading gold. The evening sun was dipping low, turning the Nebraska sky into a quiet painting of orange and blue. He drove slowly, the steady hum of his van blending with the soft sound of wind rushing past. The town was fading in his mirrors, the diner, the parking lot, the faces that had watched everything unfold. But the lesson of that moment, it stayed with him. He thought about how fast things had changed. One minute, he was just stopping for lunch. The next, he was staring down a group of men who thought they could break his spirit with laughter. Yet here he was, calm, unharmed, and stronger than before. As the miles rolled by, Leon smiled faintly. Life had taught him long ago that people show their true selves not in moments of comfort, but in moments of choice. Those bikers had chosen cruelty when kindness was free, but that day they'd learned something. Not from violence or anger, but from the quiet strength of a man who refused to hate them back. He thought of the Guardians, his brothers of the road. Not a gang, not an army, but a family bound by respect. They didn't come roaring in to fight. They came to remind, to show that power isn't about size or numbers. It's about standing together when someone needs you most. Leon's father used to say, "When people push you down, stay calm. The ground is steady. That's where roots grow." Those words echoed now. He hadn't just stayed calm. He had shown the world that true courage doesn't need noise. It speaks quietly through action. After a while, he pulled over at a rest stop on the side of the highway. The sun had almost vanished, leaving streaks of purple in the sky. He rolled down the window, feeling the cool evening air brush against his face. The faint scent of rain drifted in, mixing with the smell of earth. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment. In that stillness, the memory replayed in his mind. The cruel laughter, the nervous silence, and finally, the sound of those engines arriving like thunder. But the best sound of all had come later, silence. The kind that follows peace. The kind that tells you the world for one small moment set itself right. Leon chuckled softly to himself. "Funny," he murmured. "How some people think strength is loud." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small photo, an old picture of him standing beside his first bike, years before the accident that took his legs. He was smiling wide in the photo, full of youth and energy. He ran a thumb over the worn edges and whispered, "Still on the road, old friend, just in a different way." He placed the photo back, started the engine again, and merged onto the open road. The sky had turned a deep shade of violet, and the first stars were starting to appear. Back at the diner, the story was already spreading. People were talking, not about the fight because there hadn't been one, but about the way a man in a wheelchair had faced down hate with calm. How a brotherhood had shown up not to harm, but to remind others what respect looked like. It wasn't gossip. It was admiration. Quiet, humble admiration that had a way of changing how people looked at each other the next day. The waitress, cleaning the counter that night, found herself smiling for no reason. She replayed Leon's words in her mind. Respect costs nothing. Simple words, but somehow they stayed with her. She looked out the window one last time before closing up, half expecting to see the man again. But the parking lot was empty now, still under the glow of the streetlight. Only the faint smell of coffee and tire dust remained, the scent of a story worth remembering. On the road, Leon's van rolled smoothly under the starlit sky. He wasn't thinking about revenge or pride. He was thinking about kindness and how fragile it could seem, yet how powerful it truly was. He imagined those bikers later that night, maybe sitting somewhere quiet, their laughter gone, thinking about what happened. Maybe they'd feel ashamed. Maybe they'd learn. Or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, Leon knew he had done his part. He'd planted something, not anger, but awareness. And sometimes that's enough. He passed a long stretch of open field where the wind moved like waves through the tall grass. It reminded him of something simple yet profound. Peace doesn't always come when you want it, but it always comes when you earn it. A few miles later, he saw a sign by the roadside, "You're never alone on this road." It was old, faded, but it made him smile. He whispered, "You're right about that." He turned up the radio just a little, the soft notes of an old country song filling the air. The headlights cut through the darkness as he drove on, steady and unhurried. He didn't need to look back. He'd already left something behind, a lesson, a story, a moment that would live quietly in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. That day, a man in a wheelchair reminded a whole town that respect isn't earned through fear or power. It's given through understanding. That true courage isn't in the body, but in the heart. As Leon disappeared down the dark stretch of highway, a faint smile lingered on his face. The road ahead was long, but so was his peace. And somewhere far behind him in that small Nebraska town, the faint echo of engines still hummed in the air, not as a warning, but as a promise. A promise that no one rides alone, and no one stands alone, not when there are still people brave enough to do the right thing quietly.